In this video, I'm going to be going over the base area of the top 5 builds that I believe everyone should have, or at least something similar to. First of all, full disclosure, narrowing this down to 5 builds was actually pretty difficult, which is why I'm making it a bit sort of looser, rather than going an exact example of a build, everyone should have this build, is kind of a bit redundant. So I've kind of like opened it up a little bit to incorporate a few things, a little bit of sort of common sense or things that you would like to add to them, and I'm just going to give like a brief overview of what the build should be able to encompass, and then give some examples, and from there you should be able to just sort of figure out what it is you like or would not like about that type of build. So up first is quite simply a full red DPS build, a high-end full red DPS build. The reason for this is, one, they're pretty much the golden standard of solo play or even really basic group play. They are essentially the very first stepping stone you need or should have in order to get into raids, as most raid carry groups will say just put on a high-end full red DPS build, and they are just generally one of the easiest and best ways to go. Granted, they can take a little bit to build up and get maxed out, though they do perform admirably throughout pretty much all content. What I have going on in the background footage now is my standard high-end DPS build. 3-piece Providence utilising the gift as well as the sacrifice. I use Dod City holster, Grupo gloves and Fox's Prayer knees. I also quite like using an M1A with boomerang as well as the shield splinterer. This is just my personal way of playing it, and this will be just one example of a high-end DPS build. As you can see, the damage is nothing to scoff at. It is very much capable of dealing with heroic content with 2 or sometimes I even run 5 directives. It does perfectly fine. From here, you may want to get your pause button ready, because I'm going to be showing in a builder format some of the builds that I would just casually run around with as a high-end build and give it like a brief overview of them. Up first is the build I'm running in the background footage, except rather than Grupo gloves I've put contractors in and I've got a different AR. This is a pretty decent build and is also viable within raids. The Dod City holster plus use of the pistol, regardless of what one it is, I just happen to have Regulus, is a very powerful way to go in a DPS build, and also acts as a brilliant panic button. Of course, you don't need to run the sacrifice. Providence defense chest with obliterate will do just fine. Up next, we have basically the exact same thing, but rather than running Dod City holster, we're running Coyote's Mask. Although you lose the utility of your pistol, you will do remarkably more damage with your AR. Of course, you don't need to run 3-piece Providence, you can run Seska Grupo Ephemeris. However, do be aware that if you do run this, you are predominantly more focused on your AR damage, as if you swap to something else, you tend to lose a bit more, just because at that point Fenris does become a dead stat. You could also potentially run Pristine Example, obviously removing the sacrifice and swapping out the mask for Providence defense. This is the highest DPS possible with a high-end Pristine Example build, but it does force you to play scoped. Up next, we have gear set DPS builds. Although this is basically the exact same vein as going high end, it does allow for a little bit more customization depending on how you want to play, and these really do excel in group as well as solo play. Typically their starting damage will be lower, simply due to the fact of most of the time you have to build up stacks. However, when it comes to top end gameplay, legendaries, and in some cases depending on your group and what it is you're trying to do, these will be the highest DPS possible, just because they incorporate things like strikers, negotiators and heartbreaker. 2 of these allow for an amplification stack, such as strikers. 1, you do get a increase in your fire rate as well as handling. 2, you also get an increase in your amplified damage or total weapon damage per bullet that hits the enemy. In the case of Heartbreaker, it's pretty much the same thing, minus you get an increase in assault rifle or LMG damage instead of a fire rate, but hits against pulsed targets will also increase your damage. It also has the added benefit of allowing you to increase your armor, which does negate the whole argument of Albert Blue Cores. Being able to gain 100% bonus armor is typically a plus. The odd one out here really would be Negotiators, although technically critical hit damage is still a multiplier. However, it's not a standalone multiplier, or as we would call them, an amplifier. It will just add to whatever critical hit damage you still have. The added bonus here and the real power of Negotiators is being able to tag and hit several targets simultaneously. Starting off this build showcase, we do have the standard strikers. Either a Grupo or Seska chest will suit you just fine, just make sure it has Obliterate. From there we have 4-piece strikers, maintaining the backpack simply because it is the most powerful piece in the strikers set, and obviously rounding it all off with Coyote's Mask. If needed and you don't mind some scope play for absolute maximum DPS, just swap the chest for Pristine Example for perfect focus, and this will allow you to get some absolutely baller damage. Just remember to change your scope to the 8 times so you can actually proc focus. Then we have Heartbreaker. Heartbreaker is a bit weird, but the simple fact of its chest piece is actually one of the most powerful pieces and is considered to be best in slot for non-pristine example builds. So we are running a Seska backpack with Vigilance, Coyote's Mask to round us off, and then 4-piece Heartbreaker. Again, like I said, including the chest. Although you can get more damage out of using Pristine Example, this will diminish your survivability because you're going from 100 stacks down to 50. Again though, this is going to be the most powerful Heartbreaker setup, but like I said, use these as skeletons and add in what you want. For Negotiator, I'm just going to showcase 2. These are the 2 that I personally like using. Grupo with Seska backpack, 4-piece Negotiators, Vigilance, Glass Cannon, or Grupo chest with Negotiators backpack just to get more crit sharing, and obviously Coyote's Mask. Obviously you can add in Pristine Example. Yes, this will give you more damage if you can get along with the scoped play. Third on our list is status builds. Now there's 2 ways to play status builds because status builds are actually quite unique. A DPS build is a DPS build is a DPS build. A healer build is a healer build. A tank build is a tank build. Status builds are actually able to incorporate 2 very unique niches. One of which is a damage dealer, which in a weird way also doubles up as a little bit of CC, and the second one is just straight up CC. Now, status builds are actually something I really personally enjoy playing quite a lot, either in a group or solo. Minus Chungas and Warhounds, they are probably one of the quickest and cleanest ways to clear content throughout all levels of the game, minus Legendary, just because Legendary is Legendary. But for Heroic, with as many directors as you want, status is probably one of the quickest and easiest ways to actually play. They double up as excellent farmers depending on the content you're doing, because they're able to clear immense amounts of content very quickly, and the overall performance of status builds can never really be understated. I always find it quite funny when I play in a group of randoms and someone's bragging about their absolutely amazing DPS and they barely are able to do half of what I am able to do with a status build. Although that's not what I'm able to do, that's just what status builds do. Why hit one thing when you can hit everything? Now, the key decider between whether you're running a DPS status build or a support CC status build is just quite notably the backpack. What backpack are you running? So just in true fashion of what we're doing so far, let's actually look at some examples, although there's not many because status builds basically only have one really good setup each, and from there you can figure out what one's what. So up first we have the Vile Mask, 4-piece Eclipse and the Golan Gear. 4-piece Eclipse will incorporate the chest as well as the backpack. The Golan Gear can be either the gloves, holster or the knees. You just need whatever one to come with status effect and skill damage, or status effect and skill haste. For the next one, we are swapping it up slightly. We are still rocking 4-piece Eclipse, obviously, but we now have a Golan Gear backpack. It can also be Hanayu. I'd recommend going for the Golan Gear just because it will be so much more useful in other builds. Again, skill haste, status effect, skill haste mod with creeping death. and then Hanayu with status effect and skill haste. These 2 pieces can be swapped just because Hanayu is going to be infinitely easier to farm than Golem Gear, to drop with skill haste, status effect and creeping death, so that you're able to change the blue core to a yellow. Have we figured out what one's for damage and what one's for CC? The one with Vile Mask and the Eclipse Backpack is for damage. The 30% amp will absolutely outperform anything you think Creeping Death is doing. Creeping Death is best suited for a foam build, hence why we have a CC and we have a damage dealer. Up next we have skill builds, or more accurately hybrid skill builds. The reason I'm making a distinction between the two is because the standard skill build, something along the lines of this: 3 Empress, Force Multiplier named Hanayu Backpack, a Wyvern piece and then another Hanayu piece, is going to be completely and utterly outperformed to a hilarious degree by something like this: 2-piece Brazos, 3-piece Empress, and then you can either run the named Hanayu Backpack or I run Memento. And the reason for this is we only drop a total of like 10% in total skill damage, but we get about another 50 to 80% in weapon damage. This is the build that I'm running in the background footage, running around like a hooligan. As you can see, my skills are still not doing too shabby. They're not even at max stack yet with Memento, but the overall effect is mostly also coming from the weapon. Just because of that, the overall total difference in DPS is literally about double. It's rather comical. Now, the reason I actually kind of promote skill builds despite not actually really liking them is just the simple fact of sometimes I just want to play, but not really. I want to play something, but I completely want to just mind numb and wipe it from my memory. So putting on a skill build just means I can throw my turret and drone out, and then AFK, sit there, drink coffee, and ponder on life's mysteries, like why do I put myself through this? Skill builds do have a niche place within the game, though typically you do find that they are more suited to things like Oxidizer builds or more niche, nuanced builds that only really fit in certain situations. Overall, standardized skill builds in place of the current game's surroundings and what we're able to do in the game, there's not really too much point to them, sadly. I wouldn't mind them getting a hell of a boost or a buff or a gear set that just allows turrets to just take effect from damage to targets out of cover, would even be of use. But as it stands, the main reason I use skill builds is just to absolutely mongo it and cry in a corner. Now I am just going to show those 2 builds again. Some of you might notice that I've left the minor attribute 2 as well as the mods unslotted, and that's simply just because if you're running a turret and drone build, you do not need skill haste. You can use them if you want, but you do not need them. Run armor regen, run PFE, run some crit chance, something. You don't need skill haste. And if you fancy going complete Mongo, you can obviously put waveform on. And for our final one, and this is the most important one, there have been way too many times where I've played with randoms and it's like they don't even know this build or this type even exists. It's an open world looter shooter that allows you to matchmake. Of course, I am talking about healer builds. I am actively gobsmacked the amount of times I run into random players and they have 0 healer builds. They don't need them, they're redundant. Honestly, when you come to doing later content in group play, you will need, typically as a gold standard, 3 DPS and then either a CC or a healer. Depending on your group composition, sometimes the CC is a better fit, sometimes the healer is a better fit. But for me, my personal argument is you will always need typically 3 DPS and either a CC or a healer. The healer, just because of the added bonus of the future initiative set being absolutely busted, also comes in with the side effect of being absolutely broken in the form of buffing your team by an average of 20% increase in DPS. Just because FI. And before someone gets grumpy, yes, I'm aware the buff is 25% total weapon damage. That equals about a 20% increase in DPS. Notice how I said DPS, not damage. Now, the current gold standard for a healer is 4-piece future initiative, PTSU gloves, and then the setup as your backpack. You will need a unicorn, especially if you plan on keeping your survivor list. If not, you can get away with a non-unicorn and run technician. Technician is my preferred, just because 1, Faraday, 2, depending on what I'm doing, I can either stick with a blue core or on the rare occasion go for a red core. Anyway, that are my top 5 builds that I believe everyone should have on at least each character. The only reason I don't have these builds on one of my characters is because that character is designed to play purely solo, so I don't need a CC build and I don't need a healer build. Be a bit weird if I'm running around as a healer build, solo, trying to clear content. Oh, look at that, what am I doing? I'm a crazy person. Anyway, that will do it for me. Have fun, good luck, don't die. It's bad for the health.